Hello and welcome everyone. I hope the voice is clear. This is another video in the series of ancient history of Bharat, and yeah, like all through this series, like I have mentioned, one lifetime isn't sufficient enough for you to completely understand the history and everything there is to know about this holy land of ours, that is Bharat. All right, so I'm going to make my best efforts. The whole purpose of this series is to ask some difficult questions, some controversial questions, and then somebody might ask, why exactly are you asking these questions? Didn't you get the time to ask these questions in schools? Okay, for you to ask a question in school, for that you have to sufficiently teach that syllabus. But as many of you already know, the history syllabus in our country is rather a propaganda item. All right. So yeah, today we are going to focus on the social and economic conditions of the Aryans. People like to call them as Rigvedic Aryans, but I like to just call them as Aryans because we indeed are the rightful descendants of a race that was so great, okay, that without this race humanity would not have learned the things and known the things that we have contributed to the corpus of knowledge that humanity has today. Okay, it has no acknowledgement. The world does not acknowledge, even recognize, or even accept, for that matter, that there are things that we have given to the humanity and for which we deserve credit. But I would say a lot of you should give up of this thought or of this idea that the world will recognize one day what we did for them. They are never going to do it. Okay. Each and every country, each and every nationality today lives to just, there's this very famous quote by Dostoevsky. I'm not able to recall the exact words right now, but let me just take the liberty and paraphrase his quote. Dostoevsky said that, there should be no trace that you have taken help from somebody. Just put your hands on shoulders of people and walk right through them and don't let them know. Keep removing your fingerprints from their shoulders. So that is how the world is functioning these days. No due credit is given where it is due. But anyways, like I said, we should just give up on this idea that world will one day recognize what we have contributed to the humanity. Okay, but that does not mean that we completely denounce and abandon the identity that was perfected by centuries of trial and error. Okay, the Aryan identity was perfected by centuries of trial and error. It's pretty much evident from the fact that the entire knowledge that there is in the Rig Samhita and all the subsequent and successive Aryan literature, okay, all these things were in practice long before they were written down. Okay, because I would say it was a stroke of luck, it was a stroke of destiny that somebody decided to actually put it down into writing. Had not that stroke of luck fructified, we would not have known things that we know today. And today we are going to unshroud certain things that I have learned that are written in the Rig Samhita 5,000 years ago, and they're quite different from what we are taught in school, what we are taught in popular discourse, or what the media or the education system makes you want to believe. All right, so let's learn what exactly is written in the Rig Samhita and let's try to make some sense out of it. All right, for those of you who want to actually refer to this book, I would recommend it. Please refer to this book. This is what I refer to, and this is what I discuss in my videos. So let's get into it. All right, so it's chapter number 19, social and economic conditions. So RC Majumdar starts off with mentioning that the families were patriarchal. Okay, so yes, indeed, it's true. The societies of Bharat are indeed patriarchal, but that does not mean, okay, there are exceptions. There are hereditary, royal lineages, probably down south. I guess the Pandyas, they followed a matrilineal lineage. Okay, I could be wrong, but I have read it somewhere that there are certain kingdoms in the southern part of this land that followed the matrilineal way of life. But the Rig Samhita mentions that largely the communities of Bharat, they had a patriarchal family, meaning a larger amount of stress was placed on the roles of male as a progenitor, as somebody who contributes to the continuity of that family. Okay, there are certain duties that are impressed upon the male member of the family, and those things are non-negotiable. Okay, this current idea that the gender roles are fluid in society, and now people would argue that you need to be progressive in this world, you need to be progressive in this 21st century. But I would I would agree with them. Yes, some degree of progressiveness is needed, and we as a community have been progressive because there are certain things in our belief system that we have done away with, and there are some of them that we have made it illegal. All right, so we are the most progressive race. We are the most progressive race there is on this planet Earth. Okay, because when you compare it with others, others are not willing to give up those practices that they practiced centuries ago, but they still are hell-bent on continuing with those practices. So before you call the Aryan race or the pagans of Bharat as non-progressive, I would really want you to check your own backyard. Okay, there are other faiths. Have they done away with their practices that they practiced centuries ago? That is something that you must ask. All right. So the chapter starts. The family discipline was strict. Rig Samhita mentions that the insolvent gambler is disowned by his parents and brothers in front of his creditor. Okay, people who gambled, they were usually disowned by their family. I need to look for my cell phone. Just hang on a little bit. All right. So yeah, anybody who gambles, gambling was not looked down upon. But if you are an insolvent person, if you're not able to clear your debt that has accrued, because you were gambling, you were not good at it, and hence you run into debt and you go, declare yourself bankrupt. So those people who overindulged into gambling and they could not repay their debt, they were the ones who were disowned by their family. Okay, so I would say this should be a good evidence of some sense of, I would say, pride, but family honor, because owing somebody money in those times was considered to be a very big deal, and even more so bigger deal when you had played that, gambled that money all away, and now you are bankrupt. So yeah. Next is the wedding hymn indicates that the newly married wife rules over her brothers-in-law and even over her husband's parents, although she herself entertains a feeling of respect for them. It's written in Rig Samhita. RC Majumdar quotes it with the proper chapter number, that's Mandala 10, and hymn number 35 is the wedding hymn in the Rig Samhita, and that says. So this should be a nice proof for people who regularly question, because this has been, whenever you see a marriage ceremony, all the movies about marriages that are made, it's shown that the newlywed wife, when she comes home, she likes to exert her dominance over the people in the groom's house. So the wedding hymn itself mentions that yes, indeed, such was the norm. Okay. Hospitality to a guest should be elevated to the rank of a religious duty. That's one of the 5 great daily sacrifices. Okay, it's written in the Rig Samhita. 5,000 years ago, it was written down in a book. We don't know how many years prior to those 5,000 years was it actually practiced. Okay. So in the Rig Samhita, they say hospitality to a guest should be elevated to the rank of a religious duty. So whenever somebody visits your home, taking care of that guest is equivalent to your religious duty. Okay, that is what Rig Samhita says. Now let's come on to the controversial caste system. Okay, I know a lot of you will stop watching this video at this moment because it's rather a sensitive and a controversial topic, but we cannot run away from controversies We have run away from difficult conversations, all throughout the living history of this nation of Bharat. Okay, and guess what? Politicians, they take advantage of our tendency of running away from these difficult conversations. So once when let's sit down and let's get it over with. How difficult can it be to talk about caste system? All right. So we are going to only focus on what exactly is written in the Rig Samhita. I'm not going to, uh, add my thoughts and opinions. Obviously, I will include some of my own commentary, but we'll strictly stick to what exactly is written in the Rig Samhita. All right. So we're not going to, randomly say things. Okay, the caste system, RC Majumdar writes, elaborate institution known as the caste system among the Aryans in Bharat may almost be said to be without a parallel in the world. There was no there's also one of the posts on our Instagram page where I have posted something about caste system. Okay, and that in that caption I have written that caste system was a means of classification of people. Okay, when the mankind transitioned from hunter gatherers to settled communities, okay, they were faced with this problem of classification of population, because different people in the settlements, they practiced different professions, and there had to be some ground rules based on how these all professions were coexisting, because it's not like right after their transition from hunter gatherers to settlers, they had given up their all the other hardwired and natural instincts. Okay, your natural instincts is to fight with somebody who denies you your right or denies you your freedom of expression, as in if I am accustomed to doing certain things in a certain way, if somebody denies or places restriction on that practice, I would naturally want to fight. This is your natural instinct. Okay, now that since you have settled down, you cannot keep on fighting. All right, so there had to be some rules, there had to be some classification for the communities that existed during those times, and that indeed was the Varna Pratha, the Chatur Varna Pratha. Okay. The conception of impurity communicable to a higher caste by contact with a lower one underlies this vociferous tendency and has resulted in the untouchability of the so-called Sudra, who by popular error is almost identified with the Panchama, or one outside the framework of the Chaturvarna. Okay, so this idea, you will lose, because again I would like to remind people, caste is not an organic word. It has no organic root in Sanskrit. Caste was something that was conveniently used by the Portuguese, but we keep on ignoring this fact, even though most of you people who are watching this video would already know what caste exactly means and from where did it come. Okay, so yeah, so this idea of corruption of caste is a farce. It didn't exist during the times of the Rig Samhita. RC Majumdar further writes, so usually we like to, there is this popular theory. I don't think this is taught in schools, not at least in English medium and all those international schools. They will never teach you this. Why? Because their white masters living in those Western countries will not allow them to do so, and they will, bend over backwards and simply just comply. All right. But what I'm trying to tell you over here is there is this popular story about how exactly did the four Varnas came into play. Okay, that story goes by, goes through this logic that Brahma, 1/3 of the Holy Trinity of the Aryans, he made all the four Varnas. From the mind of Brahma were produced the Brahmans, from the arms were produced the Kshatriyas, from the thighs, from the thighs were made the Vaishyas, and from the feet were made the Shudras. Okay, this is the popular story, a folk tale amongst the people, amongst the gentry. Alright, but this is what RC Majumdar has to say, and he is quoting evidence from the Rig Samhita as what exactly does Rig Samhita say about the caste system. Alright, let's read it. He says, okay, an echo of this is found in the hymn of the Rig Samhita in the 10th mandala, hymn number 19, the famous Purusha Sukta, which describes the mythical legend of the sacrifice of the perennial giant called Purusha, the ideal man or the world spirit. The relevant passage has been translated as thus. Okay, this is the translation, English translation of the Sanskrit passage that was written in the Rig Samhita. Let's see. Excuse me. When the gods divided Purusha, into how many parts did they cut him up? What was his mouth? What arms? What two objects are said to have been his thighs and feet? The Brahmana was his mouth. The Rajanya was made his arms. Okay, there is no mention of the word Kshatriya in the Rig Samhita. Okay, so where did it come from? We don't exactly know. So for the warrior class in the Rig Samhita was known as Rajanya, not Kshatriya. The being called the Vaishya, he was his thighs, and the Sudra sprang from his feet. Okay. The terms Rajanya, Vaishya and Shudra occur only in the Purusha Sukta, the term Brahmana also being rare in the Rig Samhita. So these words, okay, all the names that were given to the Varnas, they rarely exist in the Rig Samhita. Isn't this, like, shouldn't you question this? Doesn't it bother you that all that was taught to you in the name of, like things that are bad about your culture, things that are bad about the way of your life, don't exactly find mention in these books? So there is no mention of Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra in the Rig Samhita. You should think about this, at least, for the very least, you should ask questions about this. That is what our civilization is all about, asking questions. Even God is not an exception to answering the questions of human beings. Alright. The term Kshatriya, of which Rajanya is an earlier variant, occurs but seldom in the Rig Samhita. The term Brahman denotes a priest by profession only in some passages, while in others it denotes any person who was distinguished by genius or virtue, or one who, for some reason, was deemed specially receptive of the divine inspiration. Okay? So in nowhere does in the entire Rig Samhita does it mention that all these occupations were hereditary or that they were not fluid. Okay? So what is exactly the basis of this? Now there are people out there who will say that no, it's all good in theory, but that's not how the society functions. Society functions on the narratives that are set or that were set in the, at the beginning of the 20th century. There was a lot of distortion of our public discourse, of our history, of our culture and whatnot. And people have continued with it. Nobody has even bothered us to look into, actually sit down and rationalize these things. Okay, we believe whatever the media tells us or whatever our, politicians tell us. But that has to change. You need to have a rational conversation with yourself, with the people that are surrounding you, with your colleagues, with your friends, everyone. Because that is the only way forward, getting over with these difficult conversations. Alright. The monarchy, moreover, needed now a standing armed force prepared to meet all eventualities, such as resisting the sudden incursions. Now that they had, set up kingdoms, okay, like I said, there was a transition from hunter-gatherers to settlers, okay. But like I said, with the leisure time and with intellect, now that human beings had leisure time and intellect, they came up with these theories of conquering other lands. Because now they were not satisfied, because they were sitting idle and they had cows and everything was done. So that gave rise to okay, now that I have the capability, let's take over another land. Let's take over the cows of the communities that have settled in our neighboring lands. That is how rose the ambition of, conquering other lands, and that required a lot of people who would fight. Okay, now that required recruitment. Okay, the people who were in power. They needed people who would fight in their infantry, the soldiers of the infantry. So this is where, when they were looking for soldiers for their infantry, this is where comes in the idea that the soldiers in the infantry, they indeed were people from all professions. It was not like a single varna fought in the armies. No, whenever a nation fought, okay, each and every individual of that nation fought. Although some people had the privilege and had the comfort of riding on a chariot, an elephant, a horse, depending on the resources that you have. Okay, but the commoners, let's say the blacksmiths, the people who made swords, all the other workers, they did not have the convenience of fighting on these vehicles. Okay, so they were the foot soldiers. So this entire narrative of only one varna was responsible for the protection of the entire nationhood, that's an absolute false statement to make. Okay, now I know this is a very politically incorrect statement. There will be people who will, let's not get into that, but that is what is written in this book. That is what is written in the Rig Samhita. So for all of you who disagree with me on this point, that no, it was only the one varna, the Rajanyas, who protected the nationhood, I guess you have a different thing coming your way. Here it's written, this standing army was naturally recruited from the ranks of the nobility of tribal princes and the chief armed retainers of the king. This is the genesis of the warrior class. Who were the warrior class? The people who were recruited by the king, for king himself was not hereditary. We don't exactly know what was the varna of these kings. Okay. This is the genesis of the warrior class. At the same time, the people of the Aryan masses, secure in the protection afforded by the warrior class, ceased to take interest in military matters and settled down to a peaceful life devoted to agriculture, pastoral pursuits, trade and industry. They constituted the third class, the Vis, later called the Vaishyas. Okay. So here again there is this idea of genesis of all the castes. Did all the varnas start existing simultaneously? Or was it a natural process of trials and tribulations, of trial and error, that first and the foremost there were only the Brahmanas, and then the Brahmanas decided to create another varna out of themselves because they were not able to take care of the other functions such as waging war and protecting others. In that order, the Kshatriyas over a period of time, they were not able to take care of other functions such as trade and agriculture, and hence, there came up another varna from among them. So who's to say that the practice of the varna system wasn't exactly a step-by-step process? Who's to say that all these varnas started existing simultaneously? Like if somebody's turned on a switch and all the four varnas started existing all together at one point in time. So this is again something that you should think upon, ponder upon, question about, do some research about it, and probably come back to this video and comment on it. Side by side also grew a distinct community of priests. In the earlier period, not only the householder but even the petty prince could offer sacrifices to the gods for himself and his people, the ritual being very simple. But when the size of the kingdom grew, so did the duties of the king. Okay, here it says, okay, now let's look at this argument for a moment. Here it says, earlier, okay, in the earlier period, everybody in the family would know how to officiate a sacrifice or how to conduct a sacrifice. If everybody in the family knew how to conduct a sacrifice, what was the need for a special class of priests? Okay, now I'm talking about the beginning, not the perversion in the later age. I know some of you will come and tell me that no, in the later age the priests were cunning and they kept inventing new and new sacrifices, and hence not others could join their profession. Okay, same was done by all the other varnas. So singling out just the topmost varna just because it's easier to target them, I would say that is intellectual dishonesty. You know, if you really want to, if you really believe in the veracity of the truth that you have, why be intellectually dishonest? Let's talk it out. All right. So yeah, here it says everybody knew how to conduct those sacrifices in the earlier periods. So yeah, make of that what you will. Okay, like I mentioned in the very beginning of this, in the previous episode, we had discussed this, that if you were to be considered as a man of value, if you wished to earn respect and regard from the society, you should be proficient and up to a certain degree excellent, achieve excellence in the two domains of knowledge and weaponry. Okay, you should know the shastras, you should know how to wield a shastra. Then and only then you are an ideal man. Then and only then you are a respectable man. Okay, possessing either one of those is not sufficient for you to gain respect in society. Okay, next up is Sudra is mentioned for the first and the only time in Purusha Sukta. Shudra as a word has been only mentioned once in the Rig Samhita. So if indeed the Varna Pratha was such an important part of the Aryan way of life, why is it mentioned only once? Why haven't they detailed it out sufficiently? The development of the caste system in rigid form with strictly hereditary and mutually exclusive caste groups did not take place till the time when the Vedic Aryans had settled down in the middle country and were already Brahmanized enough to look upon the inhabitants of the northwest, the home of the Rig Samhita, as uncivilized, Vratyas, because they did not follow the strict caste system. Alright, so again, no conclusive evidence for it. Here RC Majumdar says that the people who were in the northwestern areas where Rig Samhita was written, there were some people over there who have been given the name of Vratyas. Those people did not follow the caste system. So all we can conclude from this is there was a category of people who went by the name of Vratyas who did not adhere to the Varna Pratha. There were probably different classes and professions, but none, not even the priestly and the warrior classes, were hereditary. The warriors were drawn from people at large, and any person with the requisite qualifications could officiate as a priest. Okay, the Aryan civilization is based on merit. Okay, doesn't matter what the Western world tells you, doesn't matter what the contemporary realities tell you. The fact remains that the Aryan civilization, and we are the rightful descendants of the Aryans, our civilization was based on merit and not on hereditary rights or hereditary rules. Okay, this is something this is some perversion of the invaders, but that was not our way. The existence of similar classes among the Iranians, namely priests, warriors, agriculturists, and artisans, make it very probable that by the time of Rig Samhita, the four classes had developed into hereditary caste groups owing to the contact of the Arya Varna Aryans with the dark-skinned aborigines and the necessity this imposed on the Aryan society of reorganizing its whole structure. Okay, for this you need to really understand. Alright, there is no distinction. Like there is this Aryan Dravidian politics in the southern part of our country, and it's spreading. Okay, all it is doing is it is dividing. So let me just make it straight. There is absolutely no difference between somebody in the northern part of this country and somebody in the southern part of this country. Okay, your skin complexion is merely a result of the geography that you reside in, or maybe that has something to do with biology or maybe your genes. Okay, but it absolutely has nothing to do with your nationality. All right, So color as a means of distinction between people is rather incorrect. Okay. Yes. So there are also parallel drawings between Iran and Bharat. So apparently we are supposed to concede that no, this entire development of Aryanhood was in a way some sort of a contribution by the Iranians. And as an evidence, what is quoted is they also have some parallels with our culture. Okay, so who's to say we didn't teach them? And there will be some people will say that who's to say that they didn't teach us? If indeed they would have taught us, they would have survived. They aren't surviving. All right. One of the other essential features of the caste system, which is prohibition of interdining and intermarriage, no such restriction is even remotely hinted at in the hymns of the Rig Samhita. So interdining and intermarriage, that is something that is a perversion by the British and the Islamic invaders, but there is not even a single hymn in the entire Rig Samhita which places prohibition upon interdining with the other varnas, intermarriage between the other varnas. So make of that what you will. I'm not going to spell it out for you. It's pretty much clear. And if you still don't believe me, you should just pick up this book and start reading instead of just believing all the sources on the internet. Actually read the book and you will know. Next is the marriage ceremony. The marriage ceremony also supports this view, as it is presumed to be immediately followed by consummation. Among Aryans, only the marriages of brother and sister and of the father and daughter were banned. Okay, so the marriages between brother and sister and father and daughters, they were banned. There is also an indication that the women were married at a very mature age. Okay, so this I would say there is also some degree of disagreement that I have with RC Majumdar over here, because there are areas in this country who marry off their women at a very younger age, but we don't exactly know how did these practices started. So entirely blaming the Aryanhood or the Aryan faith or the philosophy on that no, you guys married off your daughters at a very young age is rather a very ignorant attitude towards something that is as old as time. Okay. Similarly, when girls had some defect, dowries it seems had to be given. Okay, there are some specific hymns in the Rig Samhita that mention dowry, as in when there were some defects in a woman that was supposed to be married, there was some dowry that was given. Okay, and we did away with this. Now there are legal protections for women who want to save themselves from this inhuman practice of dowry. Okay, so the next time somebody says that you, the pagans of Bharat, are not very progressive, okay, tell them this: what are some cultural practices that you did away with? We have done away with the practice that find mention in our texts of and those texts are 5,000 years old, and we did away with it. Okay. Wedding hymn gives us some idea of the oldest marriage ritual. The bridegroom and party proceed to the bride's house, where the well-adorned bride remains ready to join the marriage feast. The guests are entertained with the flesh of cows killed on the occasion. This is something that is not going to sit down well with a lot of people, but it is mentioned in the Rig Samhita. Okay, I'm not making this up. If you need the exact details, in the Rig Samhita, in the Mandala 10, hymn number 85, it says, the guests were entertained with the flesh of cows killed on the occasion. So whenever there was a marriage, okay, the bridegroom and the party proceed to the bride's house. So this entire practice, okay, somebody might ask this. Alright, this is the tradition of marriage, that it is the groom who goes to the bride's place to get married. Okay, why so? Okay, you might have a question. Why does the groom have to go to the bride's place? Why can't the bride come to the groom's place? Okay, it's not random. It's written in the Rig Samhita and it is practiced before even it was written down. So it's a tradition. So hence that is how it goes. Okay, the ceremony proper now commences. The bridegroom grasps the hand of the bride and leads her round the fire. It was mentioned 5000 years ago that in order for you to get married, you need to go around the fire. Yeah. These two acts constitute the essence of marriage, and the bridegroom is now the husband. The bridegroom is now the husband who takes her by the hand, Hastagrabha. The bridegroom next takes the bride home in a car in a wedding procession. It's written in the Rig Samhita. I'm not making this up. If RC Majumdar is making this up, then we have bigger problems. Then follows the consummation of marriage. A conjugal life long enough to bless the couple with sons and grandsons describes the newly married wife. The wife participated regularly in the sacrificial offerings of her husband. Okay, once that she is married, now she needs to participate in all the sacrifice that her husband undertakes. Okay, sacrifice was the central part of the faith of the Aryans. Again, being kind to the animals, we gave up another practice that was essential to our belief system, that is the practice of sacrifice. Talk about progressiveness, huh? Alright. Abundance of sons is constantly prayed for along with cattle and land, but no desire for daughters is expressed. The son alone could perform the funeral rites for the father and continue the line. Okay, hence we know the reason why a son is preferred by most of the parents all across this geography of Bharat. Okay. Very little evidence of the prevalence of the custom of sati or widow burning in the Rig Samhita. Very surprising. Sati, again, it has been criminalized, but it finds no mention in the Rig Samhita. This is very interesting. Rig Samhita certainly permits polygamy, though monogamy may have been the rule. Okay, this is something that also came as a shock to me, but yes, Rig Samhita also permits polygamy. If you want to marry, more than one, if you want to have more than one wife, permitted. Whether it's exclusive and specific to the male gender, I don't know. But here RC Majumdar says that Rig Samhita permits polygamy. Female mortality maintained a high standard, the same degree of fidelity not being expected from the husbands. I would say yes, the society is more scrupulous when it comes to judging the character of a female, because we live in such a society. Okay, a female is expected to adhere to certain morals. Okay, now I'm not saying completely chaining her in the household and deny her all the basic rights there are, but it is what it is. We live in a world where a woman is worshipped and praised for her chastity, whereas a man is looked upon as somebody who is flamboyant. I did not make up these rules. That's the way it is, and even the Rig Samhita says that the expectations from a female are higher. Education. In the Rig Samhita, there is no explicit reference to the ceremony of Upanayana or initiation. Again, there is no explicit ceremony that is mentioned in the Rig Samhita that says that when a child reaches so and so age, okay, you need to send him to some place, and you should, how do I put this into words, you should wear a thread. At least not mentioned. It's a practice, I agree, all across this country, but that's not what is mentioned in the Rig Samhita. The word brahmachari in the technical sense of religious student is found in Mandala 10, hymn number 109. that the sharpening of the intellect as well as the development of character in the brahmacharyan was aimed at is seen from the celebrated Gayatri verse, which prays to Savitri for a stimulation of the intellect. So here it says, in order for you to be in order to be at the peak of your development, or to be at the peak of your manhood, you need to practice, or you need to refrain from indulging in sexual activities, okay, or any activities that requires you to get rid of your sperm in any way possible. So yeah. This is some concoction that has ginger in it, and apparently I have overdone it. So there is too much ginger over here. So let me just get it over with in one gulp. Ginger is good for you, by the way. That is quite interesting. Music, both vocal and instrumental, was well known. Music was pretty much well known in the Rig Samhita. Among instruments, we find reference to the veena, and the drum. Okay, so all the string instruments and all the percussion instruments find their mention in Rig Samhita. Can you imagine a 5,000-year-old scripture that mentions these instruments? Okay, most of the modern instruments are somewhat of a modification of all these instruments. Okay. Yep. There is something that is mentioned in the Rig Samhita, that is a chariot race. Okay, it was source of entertainment. Food and drink, milk and its products, chiefly ghee or clarified butter, formed the principal ingredient of food. So the Aryans ate milk and its products. Why? Because the entire Aryan economy was based on cows. Okay. Grain was parched or ground into flour with a millstone and then mixed with milk or butter and finally made into cakes. Vegetables and fruits were eaten in large quantities. Okay. Meat was also formed a part of the dietary. The flesh of the ox, the sheep, and the goat was normally eaten after being roasted on spits or cooked in earthenware or metal pots. Probably meat was eaten as a rule only on occasions of sacrifice, though such occasions were by no means rare, the domestic and the grand sacrifices being the order of the day. This explains why horse flesh was eaten only at the horse sacrifice to gain the strength and swiftness of the horse. The cow receives the epithet of aganya, not to be killed, in the Rig Samhita, and is otherwise a very valued possession. Okay, so this entire notion that the nationals of Bharat don't consume meat is false. Okay, now there are people who have been influenced by the philosophies of the Jains of non-violence. Okay, I have nothing against Jains. They are fantastic people, very well educated, very well informed, I would say. But this theory that the pagans or the nationals of Bharat, they don't consume meat, is absolutely false. Okay, Rig Samhita, 5,000 years ago, it mentions that the people, the Aryans in the Rig Veda, they ate the flesh of ox, sheep and goat. Alright, and it was usually eaten on the occasion of sacrifice. It was not like they eat it every day, but there were some sacrifices that were organized, and it was during those sacrifices that they consumed meat. Okay, but again, there is an exception. The meat of cow was not eaten. The dress and decoration. Okay, the dress consisted of two garments according to the strictly Rigvedic evidence, namely the vasas or the lower garment in a narrow sense, and the adhivasa or the overgarment. Though in the days of the later Samhitas, the Nivi came to be used in addition. The Maruts wear deer skins, and a Muni is clad in skins or soiled garments. Okay, Now, I would say there is this popular disbelief amongst people that the nationals of Bharat or the pagans did not know the art of tailoring, and hence all they had was they would drape their cloth around their loins, or women would, largely stay naked. You know? So it's absolutely false, because here in the Rig Samhita it says that there were two kinds of garments based on whether you wear it on your upper body or your lower body. A special garment was worn by the bride at the marriage ceremony. It was later given to the Brahmana and it was called Vaduya. Okay, so the special garment that the bride wears on her wedding, apparently it's written 5000 years ago in the Rig Samhita that yes, indeed, it is a very special dress for the bride. Okay. There is no clear evidence of any differentiation between male and the female dress. This is something that I want to talk about, is that you might have already heard this very famous story about, one of the forms of Lord Shiva, that is Ardhanarishwar, meaning half male, half female. Okay, so that is how we see this particular line in this book, that there is no clear evidence of any differentiation between male and female dress. Okay, although the societal roles were clearly distinguished. Okay, but there was no clear distinction as to, you'd see that even the earrings and the ornaments as the women wear, they were worn by males. To this very day, you will see there are some dance forms down south, many classical dance forms. Men dress up as women and they dance. So these are the remnants of the elasticity and the flexibility that our culture had with regards to the gender or genders. Okay, males and female genders. A maiden had her hair made in 4 plaits. It seems from the description of the Rudra and the Pushan that men also wore their hair plaited or braided. Okay, like the choti banana, that what we say in Hindi or even in Gujarati or in many other languages. Okay, that so those plating was done even by males, and to this very day you will see there is this new trend. It's not a new trend. I mean, the people in the, not exactly West, but the black people. Okay, they have those plaits in their hair. And when you do it too much, they call it braids or dreads. Okay, so that was also done by males and females both 5000 years ago on the geography of Bharat. Okay, a kind of primitive surgery was also practiced. Right. Let's talk about the economic condition. This was all social condition. Let's talk about the economic conditions. Rice was not cultivated until later period. Okay, rice was something that was not cultivated until the later period. The Rigvedic Aryans were primarily a pastoral people, and naturally cows and bullocks were their most valued possession. These constituted the chief form of wealth and the only original dakshina. The word dakshina, in fact, is an adjective meaning. Okay. Is an adjective meaning right or valuable, which an ellipse of go or cow, because the sacrificial fee was a cow placed on the right side of the singer in search of cows. Okay, cow was, like I said, it was a very venerable source of veneration for the Aryans. It still is. Alright, that's it for this episode of the ancient history of Bharat. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like such content, subscribe to our channel, like this video, share this video with history buffs or people who at least want to know some degree of truth about the history and culture of this holy land of Bharat. Okay, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.